story will really antagonize the margin of your open-mindedness, and just as a warning before you proceed giving this video any more of your time, it might seriously test your tolerance as it did mine when I was doing the research for this video, because it will show you, explicitly where your compromise ends and where what you really believe begins. Full disclosure, I absolutely love stories like this. I truly believe that they are the best of their most disturbing and infuriating kind, because when you are forced to swallow something inexcusable to your moral framework and then wash it down, with the fact that you respect the existence of all ideas, either something is getting retched up or all of those contradicting points are going to sit inside of you and, quite honestly, make you feel sick. Gandhi's story is one of those, and I truly do think that it is one of those stories that needs to be talked about a little bit more. And Gandhi's character of nonviolence, of tolerance, of compromise for the sake of peace investigates that very illustration. But more importantly, Gandhi's story investigates the expression of certain hypocrisy, and that is what I want to talk about today. I am so excited to let you into my thoughts and interpretation of Gandhi's story. I'm also obviously happy and excited that you're here, or that you can make it here or make it back from wherever it is that you happen to come from, and just listen to me speak, even if it's just partially. I do not take your time, your energy put into listening to me just babble on, for granted. I'm genuinely grateful for the attention that you are giving a stranger on the internet. So I do just also want to say that maybe in another life I would be scared and I would tell you to be nice to me in the comment section, to keep it respectful essentially, but that, if you've been here for long enough, that has never happened on this channel. The internet, in my personal opinion, wasn't made for people to be nice. It was made for people to think. To think specifically in exposure to a broader scope of information, of opinion, and sometimes that means to a broader scope of irritability. So I am coming at this narrative with a particular angle of sharpness, and I feel like that doesn't necessarily need to be said, but for the sake of transparency, I feel it's important for me to conscientize you to the fact that my personal assumption is that you are aware of the near deity that Gandhi has become in certain circles, the far-reaching value of his ideas specifically as they relate to pacifism and equality on the delicate planes of race and religion, our world stratifications of duty and who should assume certain roles in society. So without further ado, I think I've wasted more than enough time. I'm so looking forward to hearing your thoughts, your opinions, and your comments, but I think it is time to just jump right in, so let's go. Alright, so I will die on the hill that bringing into focus the psychological context of a person's early life is a lot more appreciable than, regurgitating to you their place and year of birth. But obviously, I'm going to tell you that Gandhi was born on October 2nd of 1869 in Port Bandar, India. Although, let's be honest, that tells you next to nothing, unless you're someone who leans into astrology, into birth charts, into star signs, which I simply don't. So instead, to start things off, I will tell you this. Gandhi was married at the age of 13. The second thing you'll need to know is that Gandhi, growing up, was exposed to a really diverse range of social and spiritual ideologies. His mother adhered to the principles of Vaishnavism, which is a sect of Hinduism that emphasizes nonviolence, vegetarianism, and just overall compassion towards all human beings. The state in which he grew up in had a strong Jainism influence, and he obviously, in 1988, went to London to study and was influenced by Christianity and other Western liberal philosophies. Gandhi really idolized the moral philosophy of Tolstoy, which in his essay The Kingdom of God is Within You, emphasized pacifism and the rejection of state violence, and these are ideas that we see Gandhi go on to absorb into his own personal philosophy. And of course, as I'm sure a lot of you may be aware of, his radicalist struggles against the caste system in India. Speaking of the caste system, the third thing you'll need to know, and the third thing essentially that I need you to really put a pin in, is how ingrained the system is. One of the oldest forms of social stratification in the world is within India, and secondary to that, the fact that Gandhi was not within its lower rungs. Yet, it was not his position within the caste system that put Gandhi at antagonism with these controversial figures over here, but rather it was his personal advocacy for a preservative compromise in its application, much like Gandhi's perspective on colonialism. So on one side, we see that Gandhi is a member of the Upper Bania caste, with his father being the chief minister. It shouldn't be surprising, to anyone that given his position of clear privilege, his most radical action was a hunger strike against not the complete erasure of the caste system, which was quite severe in its brutality at the time, but he did this for the maintenance of the hierarchical inferiority of the depressed classes. This put Gandhi at direct antagonism against the effort led by this divisive individual over here, who led a demand for separate electorates for the depressed classes, seeking political autonomy for the Dalits. But Gandhi explicitly opposed this. He saw this as too divisive, as too aggressive, as too destabilizing really to the current order of things, and therefore against his personal philosophy for peace. On the other plane, it also shouldn't be surprising that in a letter to the natal Mercury in 1893, Gandhi wrote, "A general belief seems to prevail in the colony that Indians are little better, if at all, than the savages or natives of Africa. Even the children are taught to believe in that manner, with the result that the Indian is being dragged down to the position of a raw." In his 1903 letter to the South African government, Gandhi argued that Indians should not be categorized with black people in legal terms. I mean, he really expressed his severe discontent with Indians being housed alongside black prisoners, and he quite explicitly considered it a great insult to Indians. I will read you what he wrote. "We were then marched off to a prison intended for we could understand not being classed with the white, but to be placed on the same level as the natives seemed too much to put up with." You should note that all of this took place under the apartheid regime, which if you're here in South Africa, you'll be deeply familiar with. This is by no means an exhaustive presentation of Gandhi's selective affinity for British colonial rule. The rest is well documented, and I don't need this video to be any longer than it already is, but I think you get the point. I want to take you back though to earlier in this video when I told you that Gandhi was married at the age of 13. Now, I know that I kind of just dropped that on you and moved on shamelessly, but I did that for good reason, because I wanted to give you time to turn over the psychological implications of that type of relationship. There simply aren't many 13-year-old boys, no offense to you guys, 13-year-old boys right now capable of really navigating their sexual and emotional maturity independent of a girl. So just imagine being married. I say this because Gandhi later did reflect with serious regret for the abuse that he subjected his wife to, ruled by sexual possessiveness and a sexual appetite, shadowed him into his 70s. An imminent wrestling that we'll really see manifest in later years, that informed a lot of his advocacy as inspired by Jainism, for sexual restraint, for celibacy, and for self-discipline. Gandhi really strikes me, and again, completely subjective interpretation, he strikes me as someone curious, but selectively so, cautiously so, even actually fearfully so, in that the plurality of doctrines he entertains are doctrines he considers simply for the sake of pulling the best out of them. He's like Jung and Freud in many ways, in too many ways actually for my sake to remain completely palatable, but he's an incredible thinker, and I think when you are so focused on reconciling the material with the spiritual, you lend yourself to be able to appreciate a lot of sacredness in this life, and I truly do believe that he did that to some extent. I can tell you that he did definitively, appreciate and value certain sacredness, because when you read the 1933 articles where he advocates for the continuation of 4 Varnas, he claims that the defined law of life is to be extended to even the untouchables in society, specifically as defined by the caste system. Right, this principle, this sacredness of human life, he applies it, but only to an extent. To the extent, that is, that he believes that the best of this idea can be applied. And for Gandhi, the best, in context to his position of privilege within the hierarchy as it relates to the caste system, simply could not be extended to the complete eradication of the system. Because what good, what best is there in compromising the privileges of your status? The thing is, much like Freud and Jung, I also see an extension to spirituality that essentially just reduces those you see as inferior to mere abstractions, to entities, and symbols that function to the benefit of your own personal self-actualization, your spirituality, your your self-discovery in some way. We see this in Freud and Jung's view of primitive cultures being literal, physical instantiations of archaic mental processes in desperate need of an intelligent European organizer for those thoughts, for those processes, for those customs and proprieties that aren't necessarily congruent with Western culture. We also see this in Gandhi's view of women, and specifically that as literal human symbols, as instantiations of chastity. Their sexual impurity to Gandhi was an event so egregious that society's very robustness is threatened. I'm sure you might be thinking, Catherine, why such a pressure as it relates to women? I appreciate you telling me, Catherine, this is sexist, this is racist on so many levels. How are you even entertaining these ideas? And you're absolutely right. It is sexist, it is racist, but it helps not to be too easily offended, especially when you're trying to get into the mind of someone really absorbed, really sympathetic to these ideas. It helps not to be, at least for me, too emotionally bothered when trying to understand the way people are thinking on this level. So this is the way I understand it. If women are physical instantiations, right, of restraint, of discipline, of real control over their sexual urges, if they even have any, because, you know, really, do we even have sex drives as women? I don't know, but okay, you know, being serious. The point is, their psychological resoluteness becomes an anchor for society. They make up for the temptation to perversion, to the con that men struggle with, right? They fill in that gap. And while that is seen to be admired, it also strips a certain humanity from the woman. It makes her so godlike to the man's standard, and I've seen this in personal experience with how a lot of guys tend to look at girls, to the extent that I don't think that those who idealize being in a relationship understand how much they are unintentionally burdening us to a standard of perfection to rival theirs, to sharpen their character. They don't see how much they are actually damning themselves to be actually shattered when you, the guy, invests enough, you know, committed time with us, and then you realize that that is not true. Essentially, you wake up and this is a cruel awakening to the betraying consequence of that lie. Anyway, I'm very much convinced that Gandhi was aware of the severity of his sexual appetite, as evidenced in the earliest of volatile dynamics with his wife. But I am not convinced that it scared him as much. I'm actually not convinced that he regretted it as much, to the extent that it tempered within him the need to embody the same divine paragon of purity he'd created of women. Or rather, you know, by the philosophy shared by Jung and Freud, these two just keep coming up. Gandhi craved to be the rational interpreter to raw human essence, in this case that raw essence being the purity of the inferior woman. In Jung and Freud's interpretation, I really do encourage you to watch that video. The intelligent organizer was a European. European was the intelligent organizer of archaic mental processes, of proprieties, of customs, of traditions in primitive native cultures, more accurately inferior cultures, again according to their philosophy. Of course, as an Indian, you know, absorbing so much Western doctrine during his studies, of course these ideas justify the attitudes that quite frankly he already had, except now it was all in the name of science. It truly sounds like such a contradiction, the simultaneity of both fascination and insult for these traditions. I guess that is just racism. I don't know. I hope I haven't lost you in all of this exposition. The way I see Gandhi's mind was working at the time was that he sought to truly intellectualize and dispense with the raw native character of Africans in the same way that he sought to do the same with the raw purity, self-denial, discipline, and ascesis of women. Continuing on with the story, after the age of 37, Gandhi takes a vow of celibacy and partakes in a particularly unique range of experiments, which he claimed he believed would really help focus and just streamline his efforts on spiritual and political work. He claimed that these experiments were tests of his ability to remain pure in thought and action, you know, not too easily given to sexual temptation like women apparently are not. Gandhi would often sleep naked with young female idolizers, including his young niece Manu and another grandniece Abba Gandhi, justifying it as entirely valid, self-apprised tests of his sexual resolve. I should note, and it is also important for you to take note of the fact that Gandhi was in his 70s at the time. He was no longer 13. He was no longer immature. He had been a years-long advocate against early marriage, for the innocence of children, and expressed that exposing young girls to early sexual experiences was detrimental to their physical, emotional, and moral well-being. But, I don't know, apparently, such exposure was entirely remedial to his physical, emotional, and moral well-being. So, Gandhi, what gives? I don't know. You tell me. I'm just telling you the story. Maybe we can give him a pass because we are open-minded, because we have an appreciation for nuance. Maybe we can hold in delicate balance certain human complexity and compromise as we thread out the good from a so revered but obviously so complicated psyche. I don't know. It leaves a really bad taste in your mouth. These are the interrogations that I personally struggle with when I go over Gandhi's story. When does your complexity as a human being, as it relates to your decision making, cease being something of nuance, cease being something of a mere reflection of your multi-dimensioned humanity, and evolve into certain undeniable hypocrisy? Because see, you claim to be holding several ideas in delicate balance, but actually your full reverence to everyone's ideas means that the sanctity of at least one thought will be stepped on, inevitably. Because guess what? And this is the truth that Unfortunately, we all just need to stomach at this point. Contradicting ideas are in and of themselves called contradicting because the existence of A so severely offends the existence of B that A has to walk off the next convenient cliff to hell. It has to die, otherwise everything collapses on itself. All definitions of contradiction quite literally collapse in on themselves. Can you, nothing works. I don't know, can you see the frustration here? Gandhi is often remembered and revered, to some extent rightfully so, for his efforts against racial oppression and British colonial rule, specifically in India. We know by this point that this sympathy did not extend to Black Africans. I mean, during the brutality of apartheid here in South Africa, he couldn't stand the fact that Indians were being imprisoned next to Black Africans, for goodness sake. I mean, what does that tell you about your character? He's perhaps best known for his philosophy of nonviolence, which he promoted as the very bedrock, the very foundation of his political and social activism. I mean, his methods of peaceful protest, including hunger strikes and civil disobedience, these were central. But again, in World War II, we see yet more inconsistency because he supported the participation of Indians in the war effort for the British side against certain conditions. Those conditions remain to be explicitly defined. Gandhi publicly opposed the most oppressive aspects of the caste system, and honestly, I cannot even express to you how brutal and unjustified the system was, and the effects remain far-reaching today. Particularly, he opposed the untouchability practiced against the Dalits or the depressed classes. He advocated for their inclusion in society under the condition that they, assume certain roles, but again, participation in society under a limited frame of restrictions because they can only assume certain roles. Gandhi did not support the total abolition of the caste system. Instead, he supported the Varna system, which essentially just divides people into 4 castes based on occupation. And he truly did believe, deep down, that caste distinctions served a crucial societal purpose. To make things even worse, if we can even get there. But after India's partition, there was a dispute between India and Pakistan, and as part of the partition agreement, India was supposed to give Pakistan a lot of money. I think it was 550 million rupees. Someone needs to fact check me on that. But the Indian government delayed the payment, especially because of Pakistan's involvement in the Kashmir conflict. This was a territorial and religious contention that is too complicated for me to get into right now, and to be completely transparent with you, I am too ignorant to get into. But what you need to know to appreciate the scale of this conflict, because you absolutely should appreciate the scale and severity of this conflict, is that it remains to be one of the most dangerous flashpoints in South Asia, with both India and Pakistan possessing nuclear weapons. So you can see this is not something to be played around with here. Although full-scale wars, again, someone needs to fact check me on this, full-scale wars have not occurred since 1999. Anyway, Gandhi undertook a hunger strike in January of 1948, demanding that India release the funds to Pakistan on a matter of moral principle. Now, this principle, this perceived hypocrisy, that Gandhi was overly conciliatory towards the Muslims during the partition of India, Gandhi was assassinated by a Hindu nationalist of, ironically, an even higher caste than Gandhi himself. His actions, his sympathy essentially was seen as the ultimate betrayal, especially given that Pakistan had attacked India in Kashmir. Mahatma Gandhi's assassin was born into the highest caste in the traditional Hindu caste system. So as we can see, Gandhi's ideological inconsistency was not completely cut and dry. Gandhi was killed for his perceived leniency to a side most of his followers already just couldn't stomach, and whether or not that perception was accurate to reality or not, that was the fundamental motivation. In some cases, Gandhi is definitively inconsistent. In other cases, he's not. We know exactly what he believes. But Gandhi, at the end of the day, Gandhi is dead. And the reason I'm telling the story in this way is because this interrogation isn't wholly about what he believes. It's about what you believe. Someone else's tolerances, someone else's sympathies, they should test you. And I hope that they have in this particular story, because they rub against the parameters to your internal moral framework. They test the extent that you are willing to compromise for the sake of nuance. And they tell anyone closely watching your reaction which of your beliefs is the strongest. In my personal experience, someone else's compromises, seeing that dynamic kind of flesh itself out, dissolves the smoke that obscures your internal framework, hidden in superficial interrogation to what it is that you believe. And if you have no reaction at all, it tells everyone watching that you don't have a moral framework, or at the very best, your moral framework is weak. There's a cliche saying that my mom, says at least 1,500 times a day. I'm kidding. I love you, Mom. But basically it says, if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And even that doesn't fully embody the extent of what I'm trying to communicate. If you stand for nothing, right? That is, if your compromises and sympathies are too abundant to infer any reliable consistency about what it is you actually believe, you can be metaphorically assassinated, punished basically, for even what you might not believe in. Because ma'am, no one was ever clear about what it is exactly that you prioritize. But maybe clarity doesn't even matter. Maybe the mere infuriation that you aren't disclosing every priority, even the darkest of your priorities, is enough for your most extreme of loyalists to justify your removal. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying for this long. You didn't have to. And to reiterate, I don't take your time, your attention span, and honestly, just your patience with me for granted. So thank you for joining me today. I hope to see you next time. I hope to, more importantly, read your comments, but I will see you very, very soon. You take care and goodbye.